This week, America discovered what some of us already knew, that fraud runs rampant in the halls of government in Minnesota. But what if I told you that is not the real scandal? Stay tuned. I'm Matthew Sherwood, and welcome to Factual America. What if I told you that while the national media was creating the latest political drama, a series of mind-boggling frauds were quietly bleeding Minnesota taxpayers dry? And we're not talking about a few bounced checks or some small-time grift. We're talking about a level of fraud so deep that the state's top federal prosecutor says it, quote, takes my breath away, unquote, and is likely to total over $1 billion. This isn't just one scandal. It's a whole cascade of them hitting Minnesota from every possible angle. Pandemic relief for kids, housing aid for the vulnerable, and Medicaid fraud in the name of treating autism, among many others. The national headlines have barely scratched the surface of what's really going on. We're going to show you how hundreds of millions in taxpayer dollars just vanished, how some of it's now being investigated for potential links to terrorist organizations, and how the officials who were supposed to be watching the vault apparently left the door wide open. But we're also going to reveal the real scandal, how a story that has been brewing for many years was ignored by the mainstream media simply because it didn't fit a certain narrative, and how once that story became too big to ignore, organs such as the New York Times, no surprise there, failed to tell the whole story, nor did they give credit to the activists and citizen journalists who have been trying to tell us for years that something's wrong in Minneapolis. Before we get into that, let's connect the dots. It all started with a program that was supposed to help the most vulnerable, children. During the pandemic, the federal government poured money into the federal child nutrition program to make sure kids didn't go hungry. In Minnesota, a nonprofit called Feeding Our Future was in charge of handing out a lot of that money. But according to federal prosecutors, Feeding Our Future wasn't feeding kids. It was a massive $250 million fraud machine. Even in 2022, during the Biden administration, the then U.S. Attorney General, Merrick Garland, called it the largest pandemic relief fraud scheme in the entire country. As of late 2025, 78 people have been charged, the vast majority of whom are of Somali ancestry and pillars of the large Somali community in Minneapolis, a key constituency of the Minnesota Farmer Labor Party, as the Democrats are known in that state. More than 50 of the accused have pleaded guilty. 7 have been convicted at trial. And the organization's founder, Amy Bach, was found guilty on all counts by a federal jury in March 2025. The scam was as bold as it was simple. Conspirators created hundreds of fake food distribution sites. They cooked up bogus invoices for meals that were never served, using fake rosters with made-up children's names. One group even claimed they were serving thousands of meals a day, 7 days a week, numbers that were completely fabricated. And where did all that money go? Not to food. It went to luxury cars, lakefront properties, gold jewelry, and international real estate in places like Kenya and Turkey. It was a taxpayer-funded shopping spree, with some defendants buying items from Burberry and Louis Vuitton. But here's the part of the story that's deeply concerning. In late 2025, a U.S. House committee and the Treasury Department opened investigations into allegations that millions of dollars in stolen funds were sent to Somalia, with some of it potentially ending up in the hands of the terrorist group Al-Shabaab. While those political investigations are ongoing, federal prosecutors, who have been working the case for years, have stated that the motive was simple greed, not terrorism, with one former U.S. attorney saying the criminals, quote, were looking to get rich, not fund overseas terrorism. So how could $250 million just disappear? The most infuriating part is that the state was warned, repeatedly. The Minnesota Department of Education, agency in charge of oversight, knew there were problems with Feeding Our Future long before the FBI got involved. The department tried to stop payments, citing major red flags and a lack of paperwork. But instead of getting shut down, Feeding Our Future sued the state in November 2020, claiming discrimination. A judge ordered the state to resume payments, which Governor Tim Walz said tied his hands. However, a legislative audit later found the department's oversight was inadequate, and that it failed to act on warning signs. The state knew something was seriously wrong, yet the money kept flowing. Acting U.S. Attorney Joseph Thompson, the man leading the prosecution, didn't pull any punches, saying in an interview that some Minnesota programs seemed like they were, quote, written to be defrauded, unquote. He said state agencies, quote, left the door wide open, unquote, for this kind of abuse. And in one of the oddest twists in the tale, 5 people of Somali descent attempted to bribe a member of a jury, promising up to $200,000 in exchange for a not guilty verdict at one of the first trials of the alleged fraudsters during the spring of 2024. The bribers also helpfully provided talking points the juror could use during the deliberations, such as the prosecutions were a racist witch hunt against a black Muslim immigrant community. The Feeding Our Future scandal was a wake-up call, but the problem was much more widespread than anyone imagined. While all eyes were on the food program, another massive fraud was eating away at the state's housing stabilization services. This was a first-of-its-kind program using Medicaid funds to help people with disabilities find stable housing. It was supposed to cost about $2.5 million a year. By 2024, it was costing over $104 million. And in the first half of 2025, it paid out another $61 million. The reason for the explosion in cost? You guessed it, widespread systemic fraud. In September 2025, prosecutors announced the first wave of federal charges, stating providers were stealing the identities of people eligible for help and billing the state for services that were never performed. The scheme got so out of control that the state officially terminated the entire program on October 31st. And it doesn't stop there. As Armin Rosen reported in County Highway, literally a real newspaper, available only in print, that brought the fraud story to national attention back in November, 1 in 5 autism centers in the state are currently under investigation for allegedly fraudulent activity. The Medicaid-assisted autism services program has ballooned from $6 million in payouts in 2018 to $192 million in 2023, and the number of autism providers increased sixfold to over 300. Statewide, children of Somali descent are 7 times likelier than their non-Somali counterparts to receive autism treatment, according to County Highway. Additionally, in a separate case of fraud, over $200 million of $500 million from a program aimed at compensating frontline workers for their service during the COVID pandemic has gone missing. The final bill for all this fraud is still being counted, but acting U.S. Attorney Joe Thompson, remember him, has estimated the total loss to taxpayers from various schemes could be well over $1 billion. In his own words, quote, every time we look under a rock, we find more, unquote. The fallout is devastating. In the housing scandal, people who genuinely need help lost services because the entire program was shut down. In the food scandal, money that could have fed hungry kids bought luxury lifestyles for criminals. This is more than a story about a few bad actors. It's a story about a system that was, in the words of the lead prosecutor, vulnerable to being overwhelmed by a wholesale attack. It's about a culture of weak oversight that allowed fraud to fester for years. The state's own inspector general has admitted that, quote, too many fraudulent, unqualified bad actors have likely stolen money, unquote. And back to Joseph Thompson, the acting U.S. attorney, he put it more bluntly. The level of fraud in these programs is staggering, he said. And in another interview back in 2023, Thompson noted, our state is far and away the leader in fraud now, and everyone sees it. Except that they didn't. Except for a few intrepid souls. Multiple massive scandals. Food aid, housing assistance, compensation for frontline workers, and Medicaid. All of them exploited programs that were designed to help people. While local outlets in Minnesota did incredible work uncovering these stories, the national media has largely failed to connect the dots and show the sheer scale of this crisis. Did the fact that most of the alleged perpetrators are of Somali background play a role, with echoes to the grooming gang scandals here in the UK? Is it because Minnesota is a solidly blue state? Why did none of this come up when the media were supposedly vetting Governor Tim Walz when he was tapped to be the Democrats' vice presidential nominee last year? And why is the New York Times telling only about 35% of the story, choosing instead to concentrate on a minority community under siege? Is this just the latest example of the mainstream media once again failing in its due diligence, which in this case would show a scandal that is less about race and ethnicity than first perceived, but more about corruption at the heart of the DFL? Some did and have. Even I, sitting here in the UK, have been aware for the better part of a year that a massive story about fraud in Minnesota was about to break. Anyone who has followed Ann Bauer and Bill Glenn have known about the rot in Minnesota for years. And now, thanks to the efforts of Walter Kern and Armin Rosen's reporting in County Highway, the true story is finally emerging. I highly recommend you check out Rosen's excellent 7,000-word article. And where does this all end? Hard to say. The trials will continue. Some money might be recovered, but the deeper questions remain unanswered. How did the system fail so spectacularly? And will big names be implicated? State Attorney General Keith Ellison, U.S. Representative Ilhan Omar, even Governor Tim Walz himself. Watch this space. This story is nowhere near finished. If you want to stay in the loop and really understand what's shaping U.S. politics, make sure to subscribe and ring that notification bell. And drop a comment below. Do you think we'll ever really get to the bottom of this scandal? This is Factual America, signing off.